The 1980s is certainly remembered for its abundance of pop culture, but it was also a time that still allowed a kid to be a kid. This is why the decade is so fondly remembered by those who experienced it. Not to mention, there was an avalanche of consumerism that left a trove of rad stuff cluttering houses. So let's take a look back, and if you grew up in the 1980s, you may remember this. Do you remember being beyond excited to get up on Saturday mornings? The excitement of running to the TV and switching on Saturday morning cartoons and knowing you didn't have to go to school was a great feeling. Some of your favorite shows may have been Thundercats, He-Man, the Care Bears, or maybe even Pee-wee's Playhouse or the Smurfs. You watched all of this while eating a big bowl of your favorite cereal, and in those days, it was all about the sugary cereals. Captain Crunch, Fruity Pebbles, Cocoa Puffs, and Cookie Crisp were just a few. Your school days may be best remembered for playing the Oregon Trail, where you died from dysentery, lost cattle, and broke plenty of wagon wheels. When it was first introduced, this video game was meant to be educational, teaching kids about the grim realities in the American West during the 1800s. But it became so much more. When the teacher announced that it was time to play the Oregon Trail on the school computers, it felt like a gift from the heavens. During the 80s, every young girl wanted a Cabbage Patch Kid. The adoptable dolls were hard to come by, especially around Christmas. But once you got one, you were proud to show it off. If you weren't able to get one of those pricey dolls, you may have settled for a strawberry shortcake or a Rainbow Bright. On the other hand, all the boys wanted a He-Man Masters of the Universe figure. In fact, they wanted to own all of the He-Man action figures, along with Castle Grayskull. The Rubik's Cube has been confounding kids and adults alike since its invention in 1974, but it was in its heyday in the early 1980s. In fact, one of the best-selling books of 1981 was The Simple Solution to Rubik's Cube, written by James Norse. If the Rubik's Cube didn't do it for you, then maybe you were one of the lucky ones to get the first Nintendo Entertainment System on your block. This was the era that established classics like Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, and so many more. And if you had trouble getting a game to load, all you had to do was blow the dust out of the cartridge, and it seemed to work every time. Friday nights were, for many, a blockbuster night. Stepping into that brightly lit Blockbuster store and seeing an endless selection of movies was a true thrill. It wasn't uncommon to leave with a stack of movies that would last you all weekend, and you could even get some popcorn or candy to go along with it. Maybe you were one of the ones that saved up your quarters all week so that you could head over to the arcade to play the newest games and hang out with friends. You tried your best to make it on the leaderboard whenever you played Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Asteroids, or Donkey Kong. During the 1980s, these dimly lit buildings would be packed with people, plunking quarters into those magical machines for hours on end. Who didn't own a few Garbage Pail Kids during the 1980s? These funny cards became a big hit because they depicted children that looked like Cabbage Patch Kids, but they had creatively rhyming names. From the grossest to the scariest, Garbage Pail Kids were always good for a laugh. But the gum that came inside the packs was some of the hardest, most stale gum you may have ever chewed on. Growing up in the 80s, you may have also been an avid reader. Book series like The Babysitter's Club, Sweet Valley High, or Choose Your Own Adventure were some of the very best the decade had to offer. Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary books became must-reads, and a big incentive for reading all these books was a free pizza from the Pizza Hut Book It campaign. It seemed like every kid growing up in the 1980s was a huge wrestling fan. One of the true forces behind the popularity of the sport was Hulk Hogan. Everyone wanted to be a part of Hulkamania, and the Hulkster had this generation of kids believing that anything was possible through the power of training, prayers, and vitamins. If Hogan wasn't your guy, you may have been rooting for the Macho Man Randy Savage and the beautiful Miss Elizabeth. MTV was an important part of the pop culture of this time. During the channel's initial rise and 1980s heyday, it helped to kickstart the careers of stars like Cyndi Lauper, Madonna, and even Michael Jackson. In those days, they actually played music videos, so you would have to sit through hours and hours of videos until they played the one you wanted. Another pivotal moment came in 1983, when Michael Jackson did the moonwalk for the first time while singing Billie Jean, and it became his signature move. From that moment on, every kid in the United States decided they wanted to practice that backward glide, which looked deceptively easy when Michael Jackson did it. To look cool in school, middle and high schoolers across the country began tight-rolling their jeans, growing out their mullet, and teasing their bangs to the sky with a can of Aquanet hairspray. These same kids would also spend hours listening to the radio and waiting for the local station to play their favorite song, all while resting one finger on the record button of the cassette player. There was an art form to crafting the perfect mixtape, as there was only so much time on each side of the cassette. The Sony Walkman made listening to these tapes easy if you were on the go. Otherwise, they would be a gift for your significant other. The California Raisins were a claymation blues band that not only graced commercials and animated specials, but they also made it to toy stores and the fast food restaurant Hardee's. Not only could you get these collectible figures if you bought a cinnamon raisin biscuit from the drive-thru, but they also put them on lunchboxes, t-shirts, comic books, and posters. The 1980s had arguably the most memorable sitcoms of any decade, with shows like Knight Rider, Punky Brewster, The Wonder Years, Alf, and The Cosby Show. But when it came to movies, there was nothing better than a John Hughes film. If you were a teenager during this time, you were able to relate to all of his flawed characters. Being a lovable loser like Ducky was an achievable goal. Or maybe you too wore your insecurities on your sleeve like the girl next door, Samantha Baker. Movies like The Breakfast Club, 16 Candles, and Pretty in Pink were so relatable for so many, and John Hughes was able to capture that period of time perfectly. At Recollection Road, I believe preserving the past is incredibly important, and our friends at Legacy Box do too. So much so, they've offered my viewers a code for 55% off. In today's digital age, analog media like VHS tapes and film reels are fading, risking the loss of cherished memories due to things like mold, dust, and time. But Legacy Box, trusted by over 1.5 million families, offers a simple and safe solution to protect your memories before it's too late. With Legacy Box, you can convert your analog treasures into digital memories effortlessly. Send your VHS tapes, camcorder tapes, and pictures to Legacy Box, and like magic, receive back your originals and digital copies for easy enjoyment, sharing, and organization. And here's the kicker. For a limited time, enjoy an exclusive 55% discount at legacybox.com/recollection. Don't let your memories fade. Preserve your past today with Legacy Box. Buy today to take advantage of this exclusive offer and send them in whenever you're ready. Go to legacybox.com/recollection to save 55% while supplies last. New singers emerged and took the malls by storm in the mid-80s. The two most well-known were Debbie Gibson and Tiffany. These two actually performed in malls and became two of the hottest stars on the planet during the 1980s. Following the success of these two, the Boston boy band New Kids on the Block shot to fame, and every teenage girl had their favorite New Kid member. Keeping with music, the 80s are remembered for the hair bands of the day. Not only was spandex their favorite thing to wear, but bands like Motley Crue, Bon Jovi, and Poison weren't afraid of a little mascara either. For the kids that detested mainstream pop music, there was new music from Run DMC and the Beastie Boys. Heavy metal was also hitting its stride in the 80s, and no other band was as commercially successful as Metallica. News stories of the day included the ever-evolving AIDS epidemic, and especially the story of middle schooler Ryan White. In 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded on live TV after the whole country watched the first teacher climb aboard. All of this was happening as Cold War tensions with the Soviet Union were coming to a close. During the early 1980s, many kids had an Atari 2600. Do you remember playing games with the worn-out joystick that was missing its plastic cover? Anyways, games like Space Invaders and Joust became popular arcade-style games that were brought into the living rooms of millions of Americans. Television viewing for younger kids might have included watching The Bozo Show in the morning before going to school. Who didn't love watching The Grand Prize Game? Another show kids would watch prior to going to school was Mr. Wizard's World on Nickelodeon. The show made learning about science fun and engaging. After school, Reading Rainbow was another educational show that aired on PBS. The show made reading an adventure, and by opening a book, you could find the answer to anything. Family sitcoms were a huge part of 1980s programming. These shows focused more on the kids, and most of them became huge stars while their shows were on the air. Shows like Family Ties with Michael J. Fox, Growing Pains with Kirk Cameron, and Who's the Boss with Alyssa Milano made for plenty of celebrity crushes by kids across the country. For grown-ups, new shows like Miami Vice and Moonlighting put a new spin on traditional crime shows. If you were a kid growing up in the 1980s, movies were everything. E.T. made you believe, War Games made you wonder, and Revenge of the Nerds gave you hope. Not only could you watch these movies at the theater, but VCRs were becoming more popular in homes, and you could own the movie yourself. If you didn't have a VCR, you could also rent one from your local video store. One of the best parts of the 1980s were all of the low-budget horror movies that became standard viewing at slumber parties. From Friday the 13th to A Nightmare on Elm Street, the sequels that these movies produced could fill an entire night. And if you love staying up late, there is no doubt you watch the Mistress of Dark herself, Elvira, host her late-night movie marathon. Who doesn't remember hanging out at the mall just about every weekend in the 1980s? Whether you were shopping for a new pair of Z Cavariccis or hanging out at the arcade, everyone loved to stop at the food court and grab an ice-cold Orange Julius. Speaking of shopping, the 1980s had everyone repeating slogans from popular ad campaigns, including, "Excuse me, are those Bugle Boy jeans you're wearing?" Fast food restaurant Wendy's also got in on the question game with, "Where's the beef?" Do you remember Fred the Baker, better known as the Time to Make the Donuts guy? This campaign made Dunkin' Donuts a household name. Domino's Pizza also had a character of their own to promote their pizza delivery in under 30 minutes. Avoiding the Noid was key to getting your pizza in the 1980s. During the 1980s, it wasn't unusual for you to spend a Friday night at the local skating rink. You may have even splurged on a pair of wide-wheeled speed skates to help you dominate the limbo. Swatch watches were wildly popular during this decade. The loud and colorful watch was on everyone's wish list, and they represented the aesthetic of the 1980s to a T. If you've stuck around this long, don't worry, there's still more. But I wanted to let you know that we've got some retro merchandise available too. Just click the link in the description to head over to the store. If you were a girl that loved your Aquanet hairspray, you probably also owned a few jackets that had wide shoulder pads. The broad shoulder look was in, and so were jellies. These squishy plastic shoes were cheap, stylish, and comfortable. Game nights during the 1980s were ruled by a new tabletop game called Trivial Pursuit. The trivia game had you earning colorful pie pieces, and once they were all collected, you won. For those who weren't versed in all things trivia, Pictionary and Jenga also were popular party game choices. Some of the most influential toys of the decade were created out of television cartoons. Transformers was a fun concept, and it made for fun toys as well. Every kid loved transforming Optimus Prime into a semi-truck. The fast-talking commercials for Micro Machines also made these popular choices for kids. And then there was Teddy Ruxpin, the friendly book-reading bear. This animatronic bear had a spot in his back for cassette tapes that would bring him to life. Thank you to our loyal Patreon supporters listed here. Visit patreon.com/recollectionroad to join the club. As always, thank you so much for watching.